welcome to This Explainer. Okay, we're diving straight in today because we are unpacking a topic that is universally relevant, completely unavoidable, and honestly, just a little bit conspiratorial. We're talking about the hidden psychological tax of lying. Yes, we're going there. Even if you just recently told someone you absolutely loved their terrible new haircut, we are going to look at the exact mechanics of what happens inside our own heads every time we bend the truth. So, let me ask you something, and I need you to be brutally honest with yourself here. Have you told a lie today? Even just a tiny one? Well, if you're shaking your head no, the data actually suggests you might be in the minority. Decades of psychological research consistently show that most people lie on a daily basis. It's basically a standard feature of human social interaction. We tweak the truth to avoid conflict, to impress people, or, just to make our lives a little bit easier. But here is where it gets fascinating. Now, you might be thinking, if we're all out here fibbing so much, surely we get caught all the time, right? Well, actually, no. When researchers explicitly ask people to distinguish lies from the truth in laboratory settings, humans can only do it about 54% of the time. That is literally barely better than a coin flip. We are remarkably terrible at spotting a liar. For the most part, our everyday lies go completely undetected, and because they go undetected, they go unpunished. On the surface, a successful lie seems like the perfect crime, right? You get the benefit of the deception without any of the external consequences. And that brings us to the core mystery we are exploring today. If we don't get caught, and literally nobody else knows we lied, do we still pay a price? Well, a really fascinating 2023 psychological study set out to answer exactly this. The researchers wanted to investigate the internal consequences of lying. They wanted to see if the deceivers themselves experience a downside, even when they pull off the quote-unquote perfect crime. To figure this out, we've got to look at how we value ourselves. Specifically, the researchers zoned in on something called state self-esteem. Now, the crucial distinction here is that we aren't talking about your overall lifelong sense of self-worth. That's your trait self-esteem, which stays pretty stable. State self-esteem is your momentary fluctuating sense of self-worth. It constantly changes based on your daily experiences. So if you get praised at work, it goes up. If you bomb a presentation, it goes down. Because society generally views lying as an immoral act, the researchers had a hypothesis. They thought that violating this universal moral norm might act as a hidden liar's tax, quietly draining your state self-esteem every single time you do it. But wait, surely not all lies are created equal, right? The researchers thought about this too. They wanted to know if the motive behind the lie actually matters to our self-esteem. So they split deception into two main categories: self-centered lies and other-oriented lies. Basically, they wanted to see if being a good liar, someone lying for the benefit of someone else, offered a psychological loophole to this liar's tax. Let's put this into the real world. A classic self-centered lie, that's you sitting in a job interview, looking the hiring manager dead in the eye, and claiming you have experience in a software program when you absolutely don't. You are lying purely for your own material gain. On the flip side, an other-oriented lie is the classic white lie. Your friend is beaming with joy, showing off an incredibly expensive new dress. You secretly think it looks like a literal burlap sack, but you tell them it looks amazing just to protect their feelings. One is selfish, one is altruistic. So, how does our brain process the difference? So, what did the data actually show? Across their first 3 studies, which included asking people to recall past dilemmas and even tracking their lies on a given day, a crystal clear pattern emerged. The truth tellers were doing great, maintaining a high sense of self-worth. But the liars, their self-esteem took a significant hit. People who told lies experienced measurably lower state self-esteem than those who told the truth. Even though they got away with it, just engaging in a behavior they intrinsically knew was immoral took a very real toll on how they felt about themselves in that moment. And honestly, it wasn't just a drop in self-worth. The researchers also measured affect, which is essentially the emotions people were experiencing. Again, we see this sharp contrast. Truth tellers kept riding high on positive emotions, but the liars, their positive feelings absolutely plummeted. They reported significantly higher levels of negative affect. We're talking about feeling nervous, regretful, uncomfortable, and unhappy right after telling the lie. The cognitive dissonance of seeing yourself as an honest person while performing a dishonest act generates very real, very heavy internal discomfort. Here is the absolute kicker, summarized perfectly in their findings. Lying decreased people's self-esteem and increased negative affect, regardless of the type of lie. This is massive. It means the altruistic white lie does not spare you from the psychological tax. Even when you lie to protect your friend's feelings about their terrible dress, your own self-esteem takes a hit. The brain doesn't seem to care that you were trying to be nice. It only registers that you violated a moral norm by deceiving someone.
Now, any good psychological researcher knows you have to pressure test your own findings. The authors realized their first few studies had a potential flaw. Let's call it the memory problem. When you ask people to recall a time they lied, or even ask them at the end of the day to summarize their feelings, you introduce memory bias. More importantly, it creates a classic chicken and egg scenario. Did telling the lie cause the person's self-esteem to drop? Or did the person already have pretty low self-esteem that day, which just made them more likely to act dishonestly?
This is where we see some truly clever experimental design at work. To solve this memory problem, the researchers did something brilliant. They ran a longitudinal 5-day diary study. Instead of relying on foggy, distant memories or just a single snapshot in time, they tracked participants day by day for 5 consecutive days. Every single day, participants reported their current self-esteem, their emotions, and whether they had told a lie. This timeline approach was exactly what they needed to untangle that web of cause and effect in real time. What makes tracking this over 5 days so incredibly powerful is that it allowed researchers to look at within-person changes. Rather than comparing a liar to some completely different person who told the truth, they could compare you to you. They could look at your baseline self-esteem on Tuesday when you were completely honest and compare it directly to your self-esteem on Wednesday, right after you told a lie. This perfectly isolated the act of lying from individual personality differences. The results of that diary study gave us our definitive takeaways. First, lying today actively lowers your self-esteem compared to your own self-esteem yesterday. It's a direct cause. Second, they found that having low self-esteem on one day does not predict that you're going to lie the next day. The arrow of causality points firmly from lying to feeling worse, never the other way around. And finally, this completely busts the myth of the liar's high. While some lab games might suggest people get a thrill from breaking the rules, in the real world, with real people, deception brings zero joy. It just brings regret. So this leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought to carry with us. Every single time we face the temptation to bend the truth, whether it's to secure a job, get out of an awkward conversation, or just spare a friend's feelings, we usually only calculate the external risks. We just ask, am I going to get caught? But this research proves that getting away with it is only half the equation. The real question we should be asking ourselves is avoiding the external consequences truly worth the internal, psychological tax we inevitably pay? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.